Bizarre Reality Media.
Indiana County 911. My brother's gone. Can you be a little more specific, sir? He took my brother. Who took him? I don't know who took him. I don't know what. Sir, take a breath. Explain to me what happened.
And I looked out and there was this big red blinking UFO.
I can just say this. Something's going on in the woods. Something's going on. They're not dogs. They're not coyotes. What could it be, right?
I had an encounter with a skunk ape, and it completely altered the course of my life.
I found a skull. I think you guys are going to want to come film this.
Put them out. Put them out. Put them out. Put them out. Put them out.
I just see it.
Sightings of a UFO hovering over a barn.
Millie woke up from a dream, and when I went into the bedroom, she said there's a monster on the wall.
They saw that the creature had run through a barbed wire fence. They were able to obtain hairs. They sent the hairs to their lab, and it came back as an unknown creature.
Bizarre Encounters with Shayn Orin.
What is up, Bizarrites? And welcome back to the most bizarre show on the internet. I am the one that some refer to as Shane Squatch.
What is that fucking thing?
And alongside me, I have the big bad Boo Daddy himself, Sir Orin Felix. Welcome to another exciting installment in the Halloween special. How's it going today, Orin?
It's going pretty good. That was a pretty spooky intro there. I wasn't quite prepared for that. And I mean, normally it's very suggestive with the moans and the grunts and whatnot. I wasn't ready for a little ghosty action there.
Well, I was trying to keep it a little bit more PG, but I realized afterwards, just now playing it, that there's an F word in, the intro to me starting up. So I guess that totally contradicted itself.
So you
but
done fucked up is what
I done fucked up, but at least we don't have moaning in the beginning. So it's a little bit more, it's R instead of X rated at least, right? Down
like
one rating.
California clean.
It's California clean there. That's as best as we can do. But
if that's as bad as it gets, I think we're all doing pretty good. So.
We might get pretty bad this episode. It depends. We'll have to see. We'll play it by ear. We'll try to keep it somewhat clean. Maybe we'll have Alex Jones apologize for us at some point. But for the most part, like I said, since it's Halloween stuff, we're going to try to keep it somewhat clean. But going into exciting news and updates, well, somewhat exciting, since we still don't know what the hell Twitch is yet. I also set us up with Rumble, so we are now on Rumble. So we are now on YouTube, TikTok, and Rumble, and hopefully at some point I'm going to try to figure out how to live feed onto TikTok. I tried to do it the other day, and it wouldn't let me just cast my screen, so I got to figure out how to do it, but we're going live in multiple places, man. Fun and exciting.
Yeah, and most of them I still have no idea what they are. So, it's a mystery to me. So if you guys figure it out, let me know.
Well, apparently the only one that seems to really matter to people is YouTube. So that's all that matters. We have a YouTube, right?
I know what that one is. I'm okay on that. So.
And speaking of YouTube, one of the exciting things that will be going on live on the YouTube, the Twitch, and the Rumble now will be our Halloween special, which will be happening on October 30th, right? That's the day before Halloween.
Yes, sir.
So a lot of fun, exciting stuff going on. And of course, for that, we are going to end up dropping that the next day on the feed so that everybody is able to listen to it near Halloween. So we're going to make sure we keep it spooky as we get towards the end of the month. So make sure you guys pop into that live special. As usual, it'll be happening on Thursday, October 30th at about 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So hopefully you guys are able to join us for that.
And speaking of live streams, we've got our next episode of Bizarre Inquiries on the Bizarre Reality Media. See,
there you go.
Getting tongue-tied over that. On the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube channel. It's going to be Thursday, November 6th, roughly 7:15 Eastern Time. You guys be sure to submit any questions or articles or videos or anything that you want us to inquire about. And also be sure to join us in the chat.
And if you guys didn't catch the last one, it was definitely full of Halloween fun, so I highly recommend going and checking that one out. And if you guys want to contact us for any reason whatsoever, be it sharing your experiences or encounters on the show, sharing some stuff for Bizarre Inquiries, or contacting us for any reason whatsoever, the best means of doing so is through email, which is bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys could always call into our Bizarre Reality hotline, and that number is 313-364-1551, and we are are still trying to collect calls for the Halloween special. Believe it or not, we have not gotten one call, which is absolutely surprising. So if anybody is still interested in doing that, make sure you guys get it to us before October 30th. And if not, then we're going to spin the special a different way and just talk about some different folklore and our own personal experiences. But hopefully we can at least get one call from you guys.
And if you guys would like to support the show, Shane, tell them how they can do that.
First and foremost, you guys can go and check out the Bizarre Reality Media Patreon. 2 tiers available, ad-free/early access and full access. And with full access, you get video content. You guys get bonus episodes. You get the 0.5s of inquiries. A lot of fun, exciting stuff. So definitely worth going and checking out. And if you guys want to see what it's all about, there are 7 days free trials available.
And you guys can also check out the Bizarre Reality Media merch store. See, still getting me tongue-tied. There's a lot of Bizarre Reality Media merch store.
It's all the bizarres. I go into one of the other ones because half the time when I go to announce bizarre inquiries, I end up saying bizarre encounters. So, I mean, whatever. We just got to own the word, like I said.
But anyway, the merch store. You can check it out. T-shirts starting at the absurdly, might I say, spooky low and oddly specific price of $15.68 plus shipping.
And of course, you guys can scoop some awesome Halloween cryptid gear. So definitely right now is the time of year to go and check that out. And if you got, and I know times are tough out there, but if you guys would like to support us in some other ways, how can they do so, Orin?
Well, first off, they can leave a review.
You guys can always go and follow the show on Instagram and Facebook.
You can share the show and like, share, and subscribe and all the internet things.
And you guys, of course, can catch live shows on the Bizarre Reality Media YouTube, Twitch, and now Rumble channels. A lot of cool places to catch us.
And everything we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description. So tonight's episode is something that Shane has put together for our kind of month of Halloween we're doing here. Something that we haven't really touched on too much on the show, so I'm excited to kind of dig into some old-timey folklore and some real Halloween type stuff. So Shane, why don't you tell everybody what we're going to be talking about tonight?
As you guys can tell from the music, today we are going to be diving into vampires and vampires from around the globe. So we got a wide variety of this stuff, and we're going to try to connect it in with a bunch of other folklore and everything that we've been covering. But before we get into the initial stuff, kind of laying down the overview on what exactly vampires are as far as the typical folklore goes, I got to ask, Orin, what's your initial thought on vampires? Do you think there's any validity to the concept? Do you think it's all strictly folklore? Like, what's your initial thought on vampires before we even touch it?
So without getting too deep into some stuff I want to share at the end when we do kind of thoughts and theories and things of that nature, I think like a lot of things we talk about on the show, the whole nugget of truth idea, I think, whatever was the impetus for a lot of these vampire legends, I think very well could be based in fact. I think that could be a real thing. And I think it could touch on a lot of things, like you said, that we talk about on the show. So I'm excited to get into this one and kind of pick your brain about it as we go. But yeah, I definitely think there's some validity to it. And I think it could be very much a issue of language like we talk about all the time.
See, I see vampires as almost kind of like the thing with werewolves, that there is some validity to the concept, but because of the name and the folklore based around it, everybody kind of throws it off as fiction. But as soon as you connect in, werewolves with Dogman stuff, or you start connecting in vampires with some of these, I guess you could say dark, energetic type beings, then it completely makes sense. But you kind of have to understand the root folklore, understand where people got the ideas from, and then kind of pick out your own what was stuff that was just created through playing telephone and retelling stories.
Yeah, and almost not look at things quite so literally. Like I always say, what could these type things mean in real world terms? When it comes to, like you said, werewolves, vampires, any of that kind of old folklore, I think it's really, really important to keep in mind, okay, again, these people were describing indescribable things with the best language they had. What could they actually mean in modern day terms?
And just like the Wendigo, it's one of those things that the appearance changes a lot through time. And what we know it as today is a lot different from what people knew it as in the past. And that's kind of what I'd like to get into today, is kind of dividing up some of this different folklore to try to figure out a bit of the root of it. So without further ado, let's get into vampires.
Let's do it.
A vampire is a creature from folklore that subsists by feeding on the vital essence, generally in the form of blood, of the living. Vampires are often described as unnaturally powerful with a variety of abilities, one being their near indestructibility, which makes them difficult to kill. In European folklore, vampires are undead creatures that often visited loved ones and caused mischief or death in the neighborhoods they inhabited while they were alive. They wore shrouds that were often described as bloated and or ruddy, which means having a healthy red color, or dark complexion, which is much different from today's gaunt, pale vampire that dates from the early 19th century. So already right there, you already have a pretty big difference in appearance, where originally they were kind of described as these like kind of dark complected, reddish, like darkly complected creatures. And today we know them as these like pale, gaunt, undead vampire-like beings. So already right there, kind of a weird differentiation.
So kind of what I think about this, and I know you're going to touch on it a lot more throughout the notes, is it's one of those situations where media and movies and basically pop culture has really like flavored people's perception of vampires to such a degree that that's kind of just the accepted norm. It's almost like a situation where, you know, we really don't have any idea what dinosaurs actually fucking look like, but everybody just assumes they look like Jurassic Park. Like, that's what I kept thinking as I was reading through these notes. Like, basically, you know, Bram Stoker's Dracula and the old Universal movies have kind of become the de facto depiction and what people assume a vampire is, even if that's not totally accurate to the folklore.
The attractive vampires. That's what everything's kind of shifted into today.
Like Twilight?
When you're a vampire, you become very sexy.
Yeah, as Nandar says, he became a vampire to be sexy. So, I mean, okay. Some people. Vampiric entities have been recorded in most cultures, but the term vampire likely comes from a Slavic word, such as the 11th century Slavic upire, which describes a blood-drinking undead creature in Eastern European folklore. The word spread from Slavic languages, possibly through Turkish or Greek influences, and entered Western Europe in the early 18th century, eventually reaching England through France. In modern times, the vampire is generally held to be a fictitious entity, although belief in similar vampiric creatures such as the chupacabra, reptilians, certain demonic entities, or even energy vampires is seen as less fictitious amongst the researcher community. Early folk belief in vampires has sometimes been ascribed to the ignorance of the body's process of decomposition after death, and how people in pre-industrial societies tried to rationalize this, creating the figure of the vampire to explain the mysteries of death. And do you have any comments before I keep going on?
Nope, I think I'm good right now.
Because I purposely kind of laid down the whole thing with energy vampires, and I know that you probably wanted to dive into that at some point. I think that might be the only reference I do, so I didn't know if you wanted to take that opportunity or if you're going to wait till a little bit farther on.
I've got a whole list of notes that I'll kind of save for the end, if that's okay.
Okay, so we'll get back into energy vampires for everybody that's heard of that concept, but
we're going to circle back around to it.
We'll circle back around. While vampire myths are rooted in folklore, they have often sparked interest from scientific perspectives. Some researchers believe that certain medical conditions may have contributed to the development of vampire legends. For example, porphyria, a rare genetic disorder, causes sensitivity to sunlight and can lead to symptoms resembling those attributed to vampires. Another theory suggests that the spread of infectious disease such as tuberculosis may have fueled vampire myths. In communities affected by these diseases, the sight of emaciated, pallid individuals may have led to the belief in blood-drinking creatures. The charismatic and sophisticated vampire of modern fiction was born in 1890. However, with the publication of The Vampire by the English writer John Peldori, the story was highly successful and one of the most influential vampire works of the early 19th century. Bram Stoker's 1987 novel Dracula is remembered as the quintessential vampire novel and provided the basis of modern vampire legends.
Just like we were saying.
Yep, exactly. We apologize, guys, for the interference, but we will be right back. And now back to the show. And just so you know, vampires want to be very, very clear about this.
I don't say blah, blah, blah.
Just want to make sure that everybody knew that. Vampires do not say blah, blah, blah.
Was that an Adam Sandler vampire?
Yeah, that was from Hotel Transylvania. I had to throw that in once at least because my kid forces me to watch that movie on an endless loop all the time because we've been slowly watching him as a family and he's made it to the fourth one.
Forces you to, I bet.
I enjoy it. I mean, I don't care. There's a lot of good cameos in those movies. You know, there's Bigfoot, there's Yetis, there's a bunch of these folklore creatures. People can think what they want, man. Hotel Transylvania is a pretty good movie.
Maybe we'll have to do a deep dive on Hotel Transylvania.
We'll just cover all the different creatures that it cameos and how they either had him correct or had him totally messed up. Because the Bigfoot, I'm going to call him out on that one. It's literally just a Bigfoot. So
okay, so not scientifically accurate, you don't think?
No, not a scientifically accurate Sasquatch. It might. I don't know. You don't get to see the bottom of the foot. You only see the side of the foot and you hear some grunting. So, I mean,
okay.
I guess that's maybe similar to some regular Sasquatch encounters that you typically see the footprints and hear grunting, but not close enough for me. But getting into creation of vampires. And the way that I kind of did this list, we're kind of going to do it where we dive into how they're created, how you defend against them, how you kill them, and then we'll dive into some of the vampires from ancient folklore kind of going around the world. But hopping into this section, creation of vampires. There are a few variations on how vampires come to be, depending on the folklore of the region. In Slavic and Chinese traditions, any corpse that was jumped over by an animal, particularly a dog or a cat, was feared to become one of the undead. A body with a wound that had not been treated with boiling water was also at risk. Talk about a weird one. Somebody could become a vampire if somebody, a cat or a dog, hops over the dead body, or if wounds weren't addressed by boiling water. So kind of a weird connection, right?
I mean, the wound thing, that kind of makes sense. The dogs and cats jumping over the body, I can see why that one didn't kind of catch on. That's not nearly as romantic as a lot of the vampire lore that we've got nowadays.
I almost kind of wonder if that maybe connects in with the whole idea of like familiars, maybe. That it was a matter of maybe they thought that like witches could possibly like create vampires or make somebody become a vampire. So maybe they thought the whole like dog or cat, probably mainly cats, jumping over a grave might have been like a way of a witch's familiar, like finishing the hex or something like that. That's the only way it really makes sense to me.
Well, I think you touch on that a little bit more here in the next paragraph. So that's kind of an interesting thought.
In Russian folklore, vampires were said to have been witches or people who had rebelled against the Russian Orthodox Church while they were alive and had come back due to black magic. So, yeah.
So there you go.
Also kind of continuing on with that. So, I mean, two different regions, but kind of gets around to somewhat of the same point.
Mm-hmm.
In more recent folklore, vampires are created when a vampire bites and or gives a human their blood, which turns them into a subordinate vampire, sometimes known as a thrall. When in a clan situation, the blood drunk generally belongs to the head vampire.
Drink some of this, Michael. Be one of us.
In some cases, the thrall doesn't completely become a vampire until their first taste of blood. Any thoughts on this one before we hop into the next section, sir?
Nope, I'm good. I'm going to let you keep rolling.
All right, so preventing vampires. In case anybody is in a situation where you might need to prevent them. Here's exactly a list on how you do so. Certain practices were soon put into place to keep the dead from rising again as the undead. Such practices included burying a corpse upside down, placing agricultural objects by the grave to appease the spirit itself or potential demons, severing the tendons at the knees or spiking the foot, body, or clothes to the ground to keep them from rising. The Roma, which was an Indo-Aryan ethnic group from with origins in northern India, drove steel or iron needles into the corpse's heart and placed bits of steel in the mouth, over the eyes, ears, and between the fingers at the time of the burial. They also placed hawthorn in the corpse's sock or drove a hawthorn stake through the legs, which is, I think, the origin of the whole put a stake through the heart, but it kind of combined the two because you had steel and then you put the spike somewhere else, and then it kind of seems like it kind of became one thing. But
that makes sense.
Scattering small grains such as rice, poppy seeds, mullein, or sand on the ground near the grave, which would keep the vampire occupied, counting the grains all night, which I always thought that one was pretty strange personally, but apparently that comes from Europe and Chinese lore.
So I did want to ask you about this one. It seems to me that we've talked about this same concept on the show before, and for the life of me, I can't remember what we were talking about. Was it maybe when we talked about like the Boo Daddy? Because
yeah, that's what it was.
We talked about like this exact same thing, that like whatever the entity was would count something small. I can't remember what it was. And that would like kind of keep it at bay. Do you have any recollection of that?
I'm pretty sure it was the Boo Daddy, but I think we've talked about that with a couple different things. Mm-hmm. And hopefully nobody takes this the wrong way, but I think that I might know where part of this lore possibly could have came from. So obviously everybody hears the whole like side of the whole like Jewish thing with they were the ones that were in charge of all the money. They were the ones that were in charge of collecting debts, loaning money out, all of these types of things. So I feel like around this time, probably people associated money counters with evil. So in turn, maybe some Jewish people with evil. So I feel like the whole concept of throwing down the like rice or poppy seeds or mullein or sand and having to sit there and physically count it up, I feel like was an association with them seeing the like money collectors as evil. Because it almost kind of seems like it's, I don't know, it just seems close to me. That's kind of like where I've always personally connected it.
No, I think that's definitely a good point. And, like we've talked about with a lot of these older pieces of folklore, there's oftentimes a very kind of racist element to a lot of this stuff. So, I mean, I think that would be par for the course with a lot of other things we've talked about.
Like I said, trying to associate evil with evil. They see the people that were collecting money as evil. So we'll kind of get into it a little bit further on where they kind of telephone concepts into the vampire concept, but you guys will see that as we get a little bit farther on. But here's another way. Placing a wax cross and piece of pottery with the inscription Jesus Christ Conquers on the corpse. Further measures include pouring boiling water over the grave or complete incineration of the body, placing something, including a lemon, garlic, or even a brick in the mouth of the corpse suspected to be a vampire, shooting a bullet through the coffin. This was a Romanian thing. For resistant cases, the body was dismembered and the pieces burned, mixed with water, and administered to family members as the cure. So kind of weird. They would feed the family member of the deceased, or they feed the deceased family member to the family, hoping that they wouldn't become vampires. Apparently,
so cannibalism keeps you from being a vampire. Is that what we just figured out?
Apparently, okay. According to, I don't know who came up with that one, but apparently. Consuming the flesh makes you not become a vampire, which the whole concept of becoming a vampire is consuming flesh. So tell me how that one works.
Well, I guess it's not technically flesh at that point.
It's a double negative, right?
Yeah.
And just to throw in some fun facts here, if anybody wondered where the whole garlic concept came from with vampires, here's a little section for you. Garlic is associated with vampires due to the blend of folklore, superstition, and literary history that portrays it as a repellent of evil and the undead. Its potent scent and medical properties, which ancient cultures linked to warding off spirits and diseases, contributed to the idea that it could ward off vampires. Bram Stoker's novel Dracula solidified the association in popular culture, making garlic the most famous supernatural defense against vampires. So, kind of linked in from multiple different places, but then basically got fine-tuned established from Dracula, which is where it seems like most things were fine-tuned established. But little fun fact for you, because I was always curious where the associations, particularly with garlic and vampires, came from. But because I've even heard of some vampire folklore where like garlic doesn't affect them. So I don't know. Clearly, trying to connect and make sense out of it connection, I think. But
well, it's probably one of those things where different regions had their own mythologies and their own different details. And like you said, Game of Telephone throughout the years, a lot of this stuff kind of got combined into one homogenous vampire mythology.
Exactly. In Bulgaria, over 100 skeletons with metal objects, such as old plow bits embedded in the torso, have been discovered. So in Bulgaria, they kind of did the same thing that they were doing in other countries where they were embedding him with things. And this seemed to have become a normal thing within multiple different countries. So I feel like at that point, there has to be, if there is validity to the vampire concept, there clearly has to be something with impaling them because that is seen across almost everywhere.
Right.
But the question of what material, because it seems to be a mixture of steel and wood, depending on who you ask.
Yeah, like we say a lot of times, I mean, just the details kind of vary from case to case, but we're all talking about the same thing here.
Exactly. And getting into defending against vampires. Yeah, they don't like that. You can't defend against these things. You can't even talk about it. They don't like it. They hiss at you. They're coming out of the shadows, and they're hissing at me, man. So before they get me, let's get into this.
Okay.
In lore, various items and simple rituals were often used to keep away not only vampires, but other types of undead. Warding magic is also known as atrapaic, from the Greek to ward off. Specific defenses against vampires include garlic, wild rose, hawthorn plants, which were obviously mentioned above. Sprinkling mustard seeds on the roof of the house was said to keep them away. This may also relate to the counting of fine grains used in previous measures mentioned earlier also. Sacred items such as a crucifix, rosary, or holy water. Modern fiction has expanded the concept to include any religious symbol wielded by a sincere believer of the relevant religion. For instance, a believer in Judaism could hold the Star of David to ward off vampires. But I don't know. I feel like, the lore says that it specifically is crucifixes, but of course that's coming from like the European perspective on things. If there is the whole concept of evil, good, all of that type of stuff, I kind of sit behind the idea that I feel like it doesn't necessarily matter what the item is as long as you have intention and power in it, which is kind of something you also see with protection that we talk about amongst a lot of other things on the show. It's not always necessarily the item itself. The item itself doesn't have power. It's the intention and the thought that you get behind having that item. Like there's no power in the item itself. It's the power in the thought that you have because you're holding that item. Like the item gives you the ego to have the power, or however you kind of want to describe it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think it definitely makes sense when you think, centuries ago when people were legitimately worried about vampires, it would make sense that you would have some sort of rosary or crucifix or holy water or something like that people, legitimately thought probably did protect them. And then it kind of became these talismans throughout the years. And then that association just kind of grew and stayed with the whole vampire folklore of, okay, so they're scared of crucifixes. If you spray holy water on them, they're going to melt or whatever. So again, I think it's really easy to see how we got to the current state of vampire folklore when you kind of take a step back and look at, again, what these things could be in real world terms and were in real world terms in the past.
Yeah, the way that I'm kind of seeing it now is they see them as, through time, they've always been seen as like the ultimate unpure thing. So essentially anything that would be deemed as pure seems to be a defense against them. That's kind of how I've viewed this folklore as I've been researching and diving into it.
Yeah, definitely makes sense.
But moving forward, mirrors facing outwards or on a door, as in some cultures do not have a reflection and do not cast as in some cultures they do not have a reflection and do not cast a shadow. Mirrors were made with silver in other days, which was considered a pure metal and is commonly used in monster defense. Vampires are said to be unable to walk on consecrated ground, such as that of a church or temple or of running water. So I'm sure you probably have some thoughts on the running water. And I also want to make a comment on the fact that the whole silver aspect with mirrors, as far as I was seeing from a lot of my research, that is a lot of where the silver folklore came from, was from this vampire thing with the silver mirrors. And then they started seeing silver as a pure metal. And then they started using it to go against these unpure things. So that's, again, why it seems that silver is always the thing that takes out any monster, is because it's a, quote, pure metal taking out something unpure, as we were just talking about.
Yeah, a couple thoughts here. So to the running water point, we talk all the time about bodies of water being liminal spaces where weird things happen. So I think this kind of plays right into that. We also talk a lot about how dogman sightings are typically reported around graveyards or churches or things like that. So I think that's kind of interesting with the whole, werewolves and vampires are, historic enemies. So I think that's kind of fun. And also about like the mirrors and the silver, the whole silver aspect could have something to do with alchemy. Also, I believe in alchemy, silver is associated with the moon. So also kind of werewolf folklore and connections there. And we've talked throughout the show about mirrors acting almost as portals. So a lot to unpack in just this little snippet here.
It's almost like the whole idea of like trapping souls too. And if you put two mirrors together, you're not supposed to do that at funerals, stuff like that, because it can trap souls in between the two mirrors according to folklore. So particularly at funerals, that's why you're supposed to cover up mirrors, because you don't want to trap the soul, which maybe goes into the whole thing of the vampire folklore. If you think somebody's going to be a suspected vampire, maybe you put up mirrors at the funeral and then, maybe you'll trap them. And this one's a fun one that I'm sure that everybody is aware of. Some traditions also hold that vampires cannot enter a house unless invited by the owner. Although after the first visitation, they can come and go as they please. Which goes into another question. With these cases of like the black-eyed children, if you invite them in once, would they theoretically be able to come in again if they are linked in with some of this folklore?
That's a good point. And I'm going to save a lot of my thoughts on that for the end. But remind me about the black-eyed children when we circle back around to thoughts and theories.
You got it. Though folkloric vampires were believed to be more active at night, they were not generally considered vulnerable to sunlight in original folklore. The idea was established in popular consciousness in the 1920s film Nosferatu, in which the vampire featured is destroyed by the morning sun. Since then, the typical vampire story was sunlight as its ultimate weakness, meaning that any human opponents dealing with the monsters who manage to survive until morning will find themselves with the advantage. Any thoughts on the whole sunlight connection with these things?
Not off the top of my head. That's one that I think is kind of, at least for me, harder to place what a real world context for that might be. And it could be something as symbolic as, light versus dark, good versus evil. Do you have any thoughts on that?
That's where I think originally it kind of came from, because obviously they did it in the movie for Nosferatu. And Nosferatu was like, kind of had the original idea of, I guess you could say, like the way that vampires were supposed to look. He was like one of the first ones on film before they started kind of getting into like the whole like pretty vampire concept. And just throw in some also pretty fun facts here. So Bram Stoker, the guy who wrote Dracula, he obviously passed away before Nosferatu actually came out, but his wife was still alive. And as far as, I don't know how exactly it ended, but she got into some like big legal battle with the guys who created Nosferatu, because she was saying that they basically copyright Dracula and like stole his story. So yeah, I don't remember what the end result was of that. Obviously the movie never got scrapped and never got put down or anything like that. Maybe she ended up collecting money off of it, but also just kind of a funny detail.
Yeah, that's pretty funny. All right, guys, we got to take another break. We'll be right back. And now we're getting back to the bazaar.
Hopping into destroying vampires. Methods of destroying suspected vampires vary, with staking the most commonly cited method, particularly in southern Slavic cultures. Ash was preferred wood in Russian and the Baltic states, or hawthorn in Siberia, with a record of oak in Silesia. Potential vampires were most often staked through the heart, though the mouth was targeted in Russia and northern Germany, and the stomach in northeastern Siberia. Piercing the skin of the chest was a way of deflating the bloated vampire. This is similar to the act of burying sharp objects, such as sickles, in the corpse so that they may penetrate the skin if the body bloats sufficiently while transforming into an undead. Any thoughts on this one before I hop into the next paragraph? I know that there was kind of a lot shoved in that one paragraph, so.
No, I think I'm good on this one.
Decapitation was the preferred method in Germany and Western Slavic areas, with the head buried between the feet, behind the buttocks, or away from the body. This act was seen as a way of hastening the departure of the soul, which in some cultures was said to linger in the corpse. In the Balkans, a vampire could also be killed by being shot or drowned, by repeating the funeral service, by sprinkling holy water on the body, or by exorcism. And you got any thoughts on this one, again, before we hop into vampires from around the world?
Nope, but in the next sections, I do have some stuff to add in, so I'm going to let you keep rolling.
Perfect. And I do have some pictures for this next section, because, of course, when you're talking about folklore and stuff like that, of course, people want to have some type of visual representation. So for anybody that's watching the video, I got a few pictures up. The first one, of course, you got to have some Nosferatu. So Nosferatu. And you also have some vampire deflecting objects, which I forgot to bring up earlier. So I apologize, guys. And now hopping into the first one that we're going to be talking about today. The origins of vampire lore in Mesopotamia. Vampires, as we know them today, might owe their existence to the ancient civilization of Mesopotamia, dating back to around 800 BCE. The Edimmu were one of the first recorded vampire-like creatures. These vampires were believed to be the spirits of the dead and roam the earth, seeking out victims to feed on while they slept. According to Mesopotamian mythology, Edimmu were created when a person was not given a proper burial, or if the deceased ghost sought vengeance. The Edimmu were not solely revenge-driven. They were also thought to bring diseases and misfortune to anyone around. People took precaution to appease these spirits, such as performing a specific ritual and offering sacrifices. The fear of the unknown and the necessary of appeasing the dead were central themes that contributed to the early development of vampire myths. And here's a cool visual representation of what these things look like. Of course, being chased by Anunnaki, which just makes it that much cooler, but just had to throw that one in there.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to unpack in this section. First off, like you said, the kind of Anunnaki Mesopotamian connections. But also what I thought was interesting is this sentence here where you said, spirits of the dead that roamed the earth. And that kind of, to me, sounds a lot like, the whole disembodied spirits of the Nephilim idea.
And connecting in with the this guy, so it almost kind of looks like an angel chasing a demon in a weird way.
Exactly. And so I could definitely see how these kind of Nephilim legends and folklore kind of was morphed throughout the years into what we now consider vampire folklore. But also it says seeking out victims to feed on them while they slept. That also gets back to kind of like incubus and succubus and things like that, and even like modern day abductions and UFO visitation. So yeah, just a lot to unpack here.
And that's why specifically earlier in the notes, I said certain demonic entities. I figured that you probably want to come back around to that, but incubus and succubus, of course, being two of the ones that I was referencing in that. But
yep, for sure.
Diving into a little bit farther, we're going to be diving into Greece. So the Lamia and the Vrykolakas of Greece. Moving westward, Greek mythology introduces us to the Lamia, a child-eating monster associated with vampiric qualities. Lamia's story is one of tragic and horror. She was a beautiful queen who became a monster after Hera, Zeus's wife, cursed her. Hera's curse turned Lamia into a creature that devoured children, driven mad by the loss of her own offspring. Lamia's tale highlight the themes of feeding and reproduction, commonly in many vampire legends. The idea of sucking the life force from living, often through blood, becomes a reoccurring element in the folklore that followed. Lamia's ability to transform into a beautiful woman to lure her victims mirrors the seduction nature attributed to vampires in later literature and popular culture. And just as an added piece here, because I know this picture's a little bit not sitting correctly, but let's see if I can bring it up a little bit. So you can see her face. Well, you can kind of see the bottom half of the body, but unlike the Gorgons, these things did not turn people into stone, but they have a lot of the same appearance. They were typically depicted as having this beautiful woman-like quality to the top half of their body. There you go. Then you see it a little bit better. And having this serpent-like tail to the bottom half, but they could transform and get rid of that serpent-like tail in order to lure in their victims.
Yeah, again, a lot to unpack here. That could definitely get back to kind of Garden of Eden and the serpent and reptilian type things, and also the themes of reproduction and blood and transforming into beautiful women to lure their victims. I'm going to save a lot of my thoughts on this for the end, but again, kind of UFO abductions, succubus, incubus type stuff popping up here again.
See, I'm glad that you're starting to see this, because this is where I want to get into, was starting to get into this differentiation here. I think that we're talking about a lot of the same archetype, but in different formats. That being like the means that there are clearly these creatures that exist all through different folklore. They all have different appearances, but we basically took all of the pieces of that, put it into one thing, and now we view it as folklore. We're talking about a bunch of individual things that all share the same qualities that eventually kind of blended up to become the same thing. But like we were kind of talking about a little bit earlier with Men in Black, with the Black-Eyed Children, there's all these different things that have these qualities of vampires, but they're all different, which is what I'm saying, that I think that we took all these pieces, put it into one thing, and that's why it seems so ridiculous now, is because it's actually a blended piece of a million different creatures that all kind of carry the same archetype.
Well, and here again, other than like all this stuff kind of getting blended together throughout the years, you have to consider the language aspect of this. And okay, if you take the literal words at face value from hundreds of years ago, yeah, it's going to sound ridiculous. But again, you've got to think about what these type of things could mean in modern day real world terms. And as we've seen just so far, there's a lot to unpack in this folklore and this mythology that connects to a lot of things that nowadays people are at least coming around to the idea that, maybe this stuff isn't so ridiculous.
And I just want to throw this in here because we have a comment in the chats. The person says, I installed mirrored closets across or doors across from each other and opened a portal. A full-grown man stepped out of it 7 feet away from me, stood there for a second and vanished. I could have pooped myself.
I think I definitely would have pooped myself.
Oh, I definitely would have pooped myself, man. That's one of those things like Ouija boards, man. You just like, they don't have any inherited badness to them individually, but once you start like messing with them and putting intention behind them, that's when you start falling into an issue. So if you have the thought that you're going to have bad things happen with mirrors or a Ouija board in your house, you probably just shouldn't put that in your house because you already are projecting that intention on those items.
Yeah, there's definitely something to just the whole concept of mirrors acting as portals. And I think, like you said, especially these older mirrors that have silver in them, I think that only exacerbates all these kind of qualities that can kind of make spooky things happen.
So this next one, as you can already see from this picture, you're definitely going to be interested in because it's already starting to connect with what you were mentioning in that previous one.
Mm-hmm.
Vrykolakas are not known to drink blood. Instead, they are said to eat flesh, specifically the liver of their victims. In 1645, Greek scholar Leo Alidicus claimed that any who were evil or wicked, as well as having been excommunicated by the bishop, could become a Vrykolakas. Upon death, their bodies could sweep up, causing all their limbs to distend, yet the bodies were hard to the touch. Anyone who looked upon the creature would die of fright, but if they spoke of it, the Vrykolakas would disappear. It was believed the devil controlled the Vrykolakas, allowing them to walk around day and night and use them to spread diseases through small villages. As the stories were so closely tied to region, the only way to destroy a Vrykolakas was with prayer or fire. And one, if you kind of follow on as this folklore kind of transitions a little bit, going through the years and everything, it almost kind of starts turning into a sleep paralysis demon. Like the way that they describe it, the way that they depict it. It originally kind of starts off as this more physical thing and then kind of starts turning more into this like demonic entity type being. But the whole specifically eating the liver of their victims, I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, that's definitely an interesting detail. And I think a lot of the description of this creature could be boiled down, at least initially, to kind of like cautionary tale type situations where, before modern medicine and sanitation and vaccines and things like that, people had to be like legitimately worried about spreading disease. And in a similar way to like the Wendigo acting as like a cautionary tale, I can totally see how, if you don't, shun these dirty and sick people, you're going to turn into a Vrykolakas, and then we're going to have to burn you at the stake. So no, I can totally see how this mythology could have started off as something kind of mundane and then morphed into kind of what we see it as today.
And this is like, weirdly enough, one of like the foundation roots for like the true vampire folklore that they talk about in movies, which is this whole idea that not only do they come and they start like taking over like a town, but they also start spreading disease throughout the town. Like for anybody that's seen Nosferatu, specifically like the newest one, this is like one of the main concepts of the movie is that the entire town around this thing starts getting sick. So I feel like this is probably the roots for the whole sickness aspect, on top of the whole thing that more than likely a lot of these people that were claimed to have been vampires were probably people that had some type of illness or sickness.
Yeah, definitely.
And then of course it's spreading after their death only kind of extends that folklore.
Yeah, for sure. I definitely agree with you there.
But hey, they got one thing right. Burn the body. That is a good way of getting rid of a disease, right? I mean, that's what they did during the Black Plague.
You feed the ashes to their relatives.
Yeah, and then you feed they got rid of that part in the Greek part. So at least they started understanding that part.
We're getting better.
And this one is personally one of my favorites, and we will get into why as we go a little bit farther on. But we are going to drive into the Strigoi and the Moroi of Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe is perhaps the most fertile ground for vampire myths, with tales of Strigoi and Moroi dominating the region's folklore. Unlike the romanticized figures of popular culture, these vampires are most accurately described as walking corpses without souls. The Strigoi were believed to rise from their graves to haunt the living, feeding on their blood to gain strength. And this is why they're my personal favorite. These were the vampires used for the FX's show, The Strain, which if you haven't seen that, I highly recommend it, especially leading up to the Halloween season. And I believe that it was based on a book series. So Also, probably worth going and checking out the book series. I never got around to it, but the strain, as in the show, is absolutely fantastic. And moving on a little bit into the Moroi. In Romanian folklore, Strigoi could be either living or dead. Living Strigoi were cursed individuals with mythical powers, while dead Strigoi were reanimated corpses. The Moroi, on the other hand, were the offspring of Strigoi, born from the union of the vampire and the living human. To prevent the vampire spirit from escaping their bodies, people would drive wooden stakes through their heart, a tradition that originated in this region. And also, as you can kind of see from this picture, the Strigoi were kind of viewed as more like primal, like animalistic. And because they were a second generation, the Moroi were almost kind of seen as, for lack of a better term, like the overlords, like the more sophisticated ones, the ones that, wore normal clothes and they were a little bit more intelligent. They're almost kind of seen as like the better variation in a weird way of the Strigoi because they had that human hybrid, which I'm sure that you have some thoughts on that one too.
Yeah, just a couple things to throw in here. First off, when you're talking about how they were described as walking corpses without souls, I wonder if that's where a lot of like the zombie mythology kind of came from. I know, the whole zombie folklore has a lot to do with like voodoo and like Haitian influences and things like that, but kind of just made me wonder about that. But yeah, like you said, this whole idea of these kind of vampire and human hybrid creatures, that gets right back to the whole Nephilim idea. And even like you were saying, how kind of like, the second generation or wearing clothes and things like that, that even goes back to, the Nephilim being like supposedly the kings of ancient civilizations. So yeah, like you said, I think we're just kind of harping on the same few points here as we go through this mythology.
And I want to point this out at this point, just because I have these really good pictures of the Strigoi and the Moroi. What do these kind of look like that I've been talking about for a long time on the show?
Well, they could definitely be like kind of a pale crawler type situation.
Or I was going to say the Wendigo. So I know a lot of people don't usually associate vampire lore with ancient America, but talking about the archetypes and how they exist in all these different places, aren't essentially Wendigos, these creatures, basically the same thing that they're describing as these Strigoi, Moroi, or any of these like ancient folkloric Eastern European vampires? It seems like it's on the same line here.
And it seems like here recently we've had 2 or 3 different occasions where we talk about some piece of like Native American folklore that has a really similar piece of like European folklore, and it's just where the kind of names and details are changed, but it's almost talking about the same thing. So I think this very well could be one of those situations, because I've never thought about it like that succinctly in those terms. But yeah, if you look at the Wendigo folklore through a little bit of a different lens, it's not that far off from the vampire folklore.
Just for the sake of doing it, too, let me bring up a picture of what the natives described the Wendigo to look like, just so I can show this comparison. Because I know I'm always chirping about this on the show, but I want to show this because these pictures are so dang close, it's ridiculous. So let me take this one off. Let me bring up this other picture here. Because if everybody has heard me talking about this on the show forever, the natives didn't describe the Wendigos as these deer-headed like creatures. They described them like this right here. Let's see if I can bring up a bigger picture. Well, it's a little bit small, but right here, you can see it in the corner. Tell me that that's not basically exactly how the Strigoi is described and visually looks.
Yeah, very similar. I mean, the Strigoi has kind of like sharp, pointy ears, but again, that could be an artist's rendering. But yeah, I think you're definitely onto something here.
So just, again, another connection that shows that it's all around the world, just like Sasquatch stuff. So maybe, we should put a little bit more validity, not into vampires as Hollywood's described them, but vampires as a concept or an idea or like an archetype of something that is out there that clearly has an interest in eating humans, which also, just to connect it in here, goes into the whole concept of Uncanny Valley. Why is it that people are so uncomfortable with something that looks so close to them and it's an inherited fear? Is it because we've been dealing with things like this since the beginning of time and they've just learned how to hide in the shadows because they can look like us? But I don't know about you, man, but you'll have some interactions with some people that just don't feel right. It just doesn't feel right. So, I mean, could we be passing some of these things on the regular without realizing it? I mean, I don't know, man, definitely possible, especially if you take out, again, the whole Hollywood vampire concept.
Well, and something I think I saw it in like an Instagram post, so I can't give credit due to who it needs to go to, but it said something to the effect of the whole uncanny valley concept. Okay, evolutionarily, why did this happen? Obviously, at some point in time, human beings had some need to fear things that looked almost human but weren't quite human. So, in the same way that, a lot of people are inherently just afraid of snakes, and people use the whole reptilian angle a lot of times to justify that, the whole uncanny valley thing could be these kind of Nephilim, Wendigo, vampiric type entities, and just like in our fucking DNA that we're supposed to be scared of these things because they're going to fucking eat us.
And most of the time, the whole uncanny valley feeling, you get it more with like pale faces. So maybe just another weird connection in with it. But it seems like most of the time when people get real uncomfortable, it's like dull faces. It's like these really, really like pale complected faces, which maybe kind of transitions
to the idea
into
of the Nephilim.
Exactly. And I mean, just that whole Mesopotamian thing. It sounds like it's almost essentially the fight between demons and vampires to me.
Yeah, for sure.
Or angels and vampires, sorry. Or angels and demons. There you go. Mixing it up. There you go. Angels and demons. But hold that thought. We'll be right back after this brief commercial break. And we are back to the show. So let's hop right in. All right, hopping into this next one, and this one's a pretty fun one, actually. Something that I'm sure a lot of people have seen throughout a lot of different pop culture, but the Jiangshi of Chinese folklore, they are the Chinese hopping vampire. Around the globe in China, the Jiangshi presents a unique twist on the vampire myth. These creatures are typically depicted as stiff-legged, hopping beings with long arms that grab their victims. According to Chinese folklore, Jiangshi were created when a person died far from home and was not properly buried. The body's soul could not find peace, leading it to its reanimation as a Jiangshi. The Jiangshi's method of attack is quite different from other vampires. Instead of drinking blood, they absorb the life force, the qi, of their victims. Various rituals and protection charms were employed to ward off these creatures, showcasing the cultural differences in how societies interpret and dealt with the undead. And I'm sure everybody who's into anime, all that stuff, has probably seen like the Japanese variations of these, but like, I don't know, I feel like this one's kind of interesting, especially because it's a weird thing to think about a stiff-legged vampire hopping at you.
Yeah, I think that would kind of shatter the illusion a little bit. That's not nearly as scary if this motherfucker's hopping like a bunny towards you.
I don't know. I feel like that's horrifying depending on how the jumps are coming in, because if you jump into like, oh crap, who were we talking about not too long ago? Spring Hill Jack, for example. I mean, those would be some pretty scary jumps if this guy just hops in out of nowhere, hops out of nowhere after attacking you, man. If it's like little bunny hops, then yeah, that's not scary. But if this thing's like jumping from like roof to roof, then that's horrifying.
Well, in my mind, that's how I visualized it, like hopping little bunny hops, like they had moon shoes on or something.
Well, they had stiff legs, so how does that work with the impact resistance? I mean, maybe they couldn't jump from roof to roof because otherwise they would just break their stiff ass legs. But they were undead, so maybe they didn't feel pain, so it was irrelevant. They'd just be walking around with some broken-ass legs, hopping around, saying, fuck it.
So you didn't need, like, rosaries and holy water to get rid of these guys? You just needed to go to, like, a high place they couldn't jump up to, or they're going to crack-a-whack their ankles?
Yeah, or just stab them with something. That seems to be a good way of dealing with a lot of these things. It's just, you got to stab them through the heart with something sharp. Preferably wood or possibly even silver. But...
Okay.
Diving into West African folklore, because of course I got to give you guys an interpretation from all around the world, and this one, of course, is fascinating. Let me make sure I'm saying these names correctly. Asanbosam. There it is. Bosam. These vampiric-like creatures belong to the folklore of the Achaean people in Africa and live in atop the tall trees of the rainforest. According to the myths, the Asanbosam are hairy with bloodshot eyes, iron teeth, curved feet resembling hooks that were used to hang upside down from trees. Luckily, these creatures do not travel outside of their territory. Instead, they wait for unsuspecting travelers or hunters to enter. Once spotted, the Asanbosam grab the trespasser, rip out their throats, and use their hooked legs to drag them up into the trees. Usually the victims were eaten with only their bones thrown down to the ground. But if the Asanbosam is filled with venom, it would convert the victim into another Asanbosam. The Sasabonsam and the Asanbosam share many similarities and are sometimes considered the same being, but there are some slight differences. In other stories, the Sasabonsam is said to be a more ferocious creature and the enforcer of the forest. And I'm going to bring up another picture here. Here's a ancient depiction, some art of one of these creatures, supposedly. So this isn't something that just popped up out of nowhere. This is something that the natives were literally making art of.
That almost looks like a depiction of like a bat or something, which is kind of interesting in light of the whole European vampire folklore.
Yeah, I was curious where the bat thing came from, and it seems like this is the main thing that I've caught that kind of has one of these, well, the earliest of the bat-like mentality to vampires. So again, just blending all this stuff together.
So maybe I'm just like going a little too far off the rails on this, but do you see some kind of Bigfoot connections with these two entities? First off, they talk about how they're hairy with bloodshot eyes. Obviously, Bigfoots are hairy. We talk all the time about like red glowing eyes in these type situations. And they're also considered the enforcer of the forest. How many times have we heard about like Bigfoot being like the protectors of the forest or something like that?
And if you talk about missing 411 too, the whole grabbing people and pulling them up into trees. I mean, there's a lot of people that theorize that Sasquatch do hang out up in trees. So, I mean, could be possibly a connection with some of the missing 411 stuff. I mean, still seems pretty Sasquatchy to me, like you were saying.
Exactly. Going into these notes, I was not expecting there to be a Sasquatch connection, but here we are.
Or Batsquatch, dare I say, because it's definitely bat-like.
Maybe so.
And, okay, now we're going to be hopping into, let me bring up another picture here, this guy over here, the Brahmaparusha and the Vrykolakas of India. Let me say that again just to make sure I got it flowing as we go through this. Brahmaparusha. There it is. These vampires were often considered a demon or demon-vampire hybrid, making them extremely violent and bloodthirsty. According to Hindu mythology, Brahmaparusha were once religious teachers and scholars who used their knowledge for evil or have committed acts of pure evil. After their deaths, they returned to the land of the living as these demonic creatures. And just to stop right there for 2 seconds, doesn't that sound slightly Skinwalker-ish?
Well, I was going to say Nephilim. I mean, you're talking about hybrid creatures again who are extremely violent and bloodthirsty. So, I mean, I hate to keep beating the Nephilim drum here, but so much of this just reminds me of Nephilim lore.
Right? And just to throw in this whole thing too, because this is probably the perfect point to point it out. A lot of the people that connect all the different religions, they kind of see it as like a lot of the other religions are just the demons, the Nephilim, the fallen angels, kind of portraying themselves as other things. The one that makes the most sense to me is Hindu religion, because Hindu religion is built on this foundation of the gods having relations with humans and creating these hybrid-like creatures, and they were giving them all this knowledge of all these different things, and their text wasn't directly written down. It was all transferred through word of mouth. Like, theoretically, if the whole Nephilim fallen angel story fits with the whole idea of them going to other places and taking over these other religions and basically masking themselves under them, I feel like the number one connection to that would be Hinduism. Like, if you read any aspect of Hinduism, it literally just sounds like the fallen angels and Nephilims to me.
Well, and like the Hindu sacred texts, like the Mahabharata and whatnot, they have a lot of depictions of things that, again, if you look at them through a modern day lens, could be like aerial battles between, warring factions of extraterrestrials and use of atomic weapons and all sorts of crazy things. So, I mean, I think you're definitely onto something there, and it's not too much of a stretch to think, okay, if, in this tradition, they have all these crazy quote unquote stories that could be now in modern day times interpreted as extraterrestrial type stories. It makes a lot of sense that there would also be these like kind of Nephilim hybrid creature connections in their folklore as well.
Oh yeah. And the whole thing about the spiritual teachers turning evil and then turning into something evil. Like,
it's kind of like, tree of knowledge of good and evil. You had, too much knowledge, too much power, flew too close to the sun. I mean, however you want to word it, but yeah, all that's in there somewhere.
Exactly. When night falls and the Brahmaparusha goes out to hunt, they wear the intestines of their previous victim on their head while carrying their empty skulls. Upon finding a new victim, they'll attack and bite them in the neck until blood starts flowing out. The Brahmaparusha will fill the skull cup with the new blood and drink from it, dancing around as the victim dies. Once dead and drained of all their blood, the Brahmaparusha rip open their victim's skull, eat their brains, and place their intestines around their neck as their trophy. According to legend, when they hunt, these demonic vampires never just stop at one victim, and terrifyingly, there appears to be no way to stop them. And I got this other really, really cool picture of one of these guys. I just had to make sure I minimize the screen. But yeah, there you go. Literally holding the skull, got the creepy long fingers. And yeah, I don't know. These things are pretty horrifying, especially considering the fact that supposedly there's no way to stop them. And they get rather bloodthirsty once they start, which also kind of seems to translate again, as I was kind of mentioning, with some Wendigo lore.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, hopping into, let's see, the next one. So when I was originally trying to find stuff from America, this was the first one that I had found before as I was reading through these notes again this next time, started connecting in some of the Wendigo stuff. But for the sake of it, I want to add one in from the Americas. So let's get into the Los Biembiens of the Dominican Republic. Biembiens. I just want to make sure I was saying that right. In the Vrykolakas Mountains of the Dominican Republic, there are said to live groups of wild beasts that hunt in the night. According to legend, these groups were once slaves who escaped their Spanish captors. Although there isn't a lot of information on the Los Biembiens, stories tell us that after a couple of groups of slaves escaped, they had no choice but to hide out in the Vrykolakas Mountains. As time went on, they began to transform into monstrous creatures with sharp teeth, long claws, which helped them become more agile. The Biembiens were said to only go out hunting at night, jumping from tree to tree, and over time had developed a taste of human entrails. In other cases, the Biembiens captured humans to use for sacrifice. It's said that if you go to the Vrykolakas Mountains, you should listen out for the sounds of grunting and gargling, as the Biembiens lost their ability to speak long ago. It wouldn't be surprising to learn that the stories of the Biembiens were created by the Spanish enslavers in order to prevent slaves from escaping into the mountains. Conversely, it would also make sense for the stories to have been made up by the slaves in order to prevent their captors from chasing them into the mountains. Either way, we might never know for sure how the legend of Biembiens really started. And I apologize for all the skipping over words on that. Like you said, the whole repeating Biembiens thing kind of messed me up on that one. I was doing really, really good for most of the show, and that one completely messed me up. But
the Biembiens got you.
Biembiens.
So again, not to go too far out in left field, but it seems to me like there's some kind of feral people connections with this section. You got, these groups of wild beasts living up in the mountains. They started out as normal people and over time began to transform into monstrous creatures, developed a taste for human flesh, captured humans for sacrifice, lost their ability to speak. And again, that kind of can get back to missing 411 type ideas and connections to Bigfoot and all this other stuff we've been talking about.
I was going to say, and this has like a mix where it has kind of like some of the Sasquatchy stuff like we were just mentioning, but it also talks about the hooked fingers and the hooked claws. So it kind of goes back into that African, like the African bat-like creature folklore stuff too. So this one's almost kind of like a blending of multiple things, which would make sense if it was slaves that were probably coming from Africa and the Spanish that were coming from Europe, blending folklore together and essentially creating these things. But
well, yeah, that would make a lot of sense, being the Dominican Republic and kind of like Afro-Caribbean trade and all that kind of stuff. So it would make sense to me, just from a historical perspective, that there would be a lot of overlap between those folklores.
And for this one, at least, I think there's a lot of validity to this one, not for the sake of vampires, but for the sake of the story of, one, either trying to scare people away from going out to the mountains, or two, trying to scare the enslavers from coming into the mountains. Yeah. But you get into the whole feral people story. You get into the whole aspect of these people were slaves that were taken to a foreign land and they just took off into the woods. They were probably speaking their own native language, which probably sounds like something that was completely made up to everybody that was around. Like, I don't think that there was this vampiric quality to this one. I think it was just a matter of people that were slaves getting thrown into an environment that they were not familiar with and essentially just resorting back to their primal feral instinct because that's all they could do in that situation. Like, I think this is real, but not in the vampire sense.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think this is kind of one of the most interesting real world quote unquote cases we've talked about. Sit tight, guys. We got to pay some bills. And now back to the show.
And diving into a more modern case, and this will be the last one, kind of wrapping it up with vampires from around the world, and then I'm sure you can get into all the different cool stuff you want to get into. But this one, of course, is a very famous story, so I wanted to make sure that we brought some attention to it. The Highgate Vampire. And this is Highgate Cemetery, if anybody wanted to see what it looked like. The Highgate Vampire was a sensational media story and urban legend that gripped London in the late 1960s and early 1970s, centered on the gothic and overgrown Highgate Cemetery. Reports of a tall, dark, shadowy figure with glowing red eyes, along with instances of strange animal mutilation, led to public speculation that a vampire was stalking the area. Two figures in particular helped fuel the frenzy. David Ferret, a paranormal investigator who first wrote to a local newspaper about a gray figure, and Sean Manchester, a self-proclaimed vampire hunter and exorcist who was quick to declare the entity an actual king vampire from Romania, of course.
Hard to argue with that logic.
Yeah, hard to argue with that logic. And here's some of the newspaper article in case you want to see how crazy they were being, walking up to this thing with, their crucifix and their metal or their wooden spear all ready to go, like in every single generic vampire movie. The growing public and media attention, intensified by the fierce and public rivalry between Ferret and Manchester, who challenged each other's claims and methods, came to a head on Friday the 13th, March 1970. Of course, because why else? When else would it come to a head? Following a television broadcast about the phenomenon, a mob of vampire hunters, armed with stakes and crucifix, scaled the cemetery walls, as you could probably see in that picture. This resulted in significant vandalism, with tombs being broken into and corpses desecrated as the panic-stricken crowd searched for the undead. While no vampire was ever officially found, the unsung hysteria led to the arrests and cemented the legend as the bizarre chapter in modern British folklore, demonstrating the power of media and urban legends to incite mass panic. And this is a more modern thing because with a lot of the vampire stuff, people kind of date it back to essentially early 1900s and later on. But this was literally in the 1960s, 1970s that people were freaking out about a vampire being in Highgate Cemetery. And like I said, I kind of put validity behind the archetype, the idea of what the vampire represents and what it is. I think that there is something like that out there. But the typical vampire motif, like I said, this guy running in with his wooden stake and his cross, I don't think that's what we're dealing with in this situation here.
Yeah, this is like you said, it's the most just stereotypical depiction of vampires and stuff. People wouldn't take this seriously if they didn't know it was a real news story and you had the actual articles in front of us. It sounds totally made up.
Look how serious this guy's face is. Look at him. He's very, very serious.
An Onion article or something. But yeah, this is kind of a funny one.
But that's all I have for the modern vampire stuff. And I know that you had some stuff that you want to dive into to kind of extend on this. And of course, I have to bring back up the concept of the black-eyed children to remind you that, of course, we want to dive into that one a little bit.
I wrote it down in my notes. I think we're good. So yeah, not to kind of derail you here at the end, but again, this was a super fun episode. Thank you for putting it together. I think there's a lot of fun things to unpack and fun connections with other things in this vampire folklore. Just some things I wanted to touch on real quick and kind of pick your brain about. So first off, one of the main things in vampire folklore is this focus on blood. And there's also a big sexual aspect to a lot of these vampire legends.
And improper burial. That's one of the other main components.
Yeah. But specifically the blood and sexuality, that kind of reminds me of a lot of modern day UFO abduction cases. How many times have we talked about the phenomenon or aliens or whatever being kind of infatuated with human sexuality and reproduction and also blood? So some interesting connections there. And like we kind of talked about, there's a lot of connections between vampire folklore and more modern tales about incubus and succubus and nocturnal visitations. And that also ties into abductions. So is there anything you want to kind of hit on there before I move on to some of my other thoughts?
I just want to point out the fact that if you are kind of correlating this with abduction stuff, maybe not necessarily the short grays, but the tall grays, look at the depiction. I mean, it kind of fits the vampire idea and the concept. So again, going into this idea that I don't think that vampires as we know them today are a thing, but all of these different dynamics of these unpure entities that we deal with all getting thrown into one stockpile kind of created this folklore. But we are dealing with things like this, but you have to look at them as these individual bases from other countries in different places. But clearly you're dealing with some type of thing that is an apex predator to humans, and the depictions of that kind of wildly change. But I mean, inevitably, I feel like the food chain will shift. So if we are at the top of the food chain, there would have to be something that would come out that would kind of correct us. So even going off of just how evolution works, if you're kind of viewing it from that point, like theoretically, there would eventually have to be something that is created to kind of even out the numbers of the apex predator.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you want to go a step further, like that's a very like kind of real world quote unquote possibility to explain these things. But if you want to go back to like the phenomenon or the others, as you like to call them, we talk all the time about, you know, this phenomenon wearing masks and changing with the times and presenting itself like people expect it to be presented. And so it kind of makes sense to me that, you know, back in ancient times, hundreds of years ago, this more vampiric type entity was what the phenomenon used as its mask. And now it's more kind of extraterrestrial or things of that nature. And it, like we said, this is the drum we've been beating this whole episode, but the whole nugget of truth idea. Yeah, there's probably something in these vampire legends that has a truthful, real world connection. It's just how much stock do you want to put into that? And, you know, what do you think the real world nugget of truth is?
I mean, for me at least, if I had to try to look at the root of all of it, like I said, the depictions kind of change, but the general depiction that I get is these like pale zombie-like creatures. Even though the original folklore, they're kind of seen as a little bit darker, but also
talk about that in a second.
Maybe it was just because of the regions and stuff they were coming from, and as they became more of like a nocturnal being, they kind of changed a little bit. But yeah, I guess I'll kind of let you throw in your point.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of close out some of the random thoughts I had before I wanted to get to my main point. But we already talked about kind of the Nephilim connections, disembodied spirits roamed the earth, fed on victims while they slept, hybrid creatures, you know, violent, bloodthirsty, captured children, all that stuff. But the real thing I wanted to talk about is connections between vampire folklore and the Men in Black. So like you talked about early on, this idea that, you know, vampires must be invited inside your house, that also shows up in Men in Black folklore. And you talked about the black-eyed children. Yeah, I've for a long time been a proponent of whatever the black-eyed children are. I think that's the same phenomenon as the Men in Black. So this kind of just ties everything in together.
Just to throw in this aspect too, because we're always talking about two faces of the same thing. The whole contractual agreements is a whole thing with demons and the fallen angels and the Nephilim too. So
yeah, for sure.
I know a lot of people think that, you know, UFOs, extraterrestrials, aliens, demons, we're all talking about the same thing. So I just kind of want to point that out, that this contractual agreement is also
like
a thing within
Faustian
demons.
bargains almost.
Exactly. Like,
well, and something that I thought was really interesting is you talked about early on in the notes, this idea that originally the vampire folklore said that they had dark complexions. And that's kind of straight out of Keel's depictions of the Men in Black, how they had these darker, kind of more Asian or Mediterranean type complexions. So I thought that was a really interesting detail. And
just to throw this in too, just because I thought about it while you were saying that, originally they talked about them as being out in the light, and they didn't have this whole thing about coming out during the day. And then it kind of shifts to the fact that they only come out at night. If you're looking at it from a broader perspective, that we're possibly dealing with like a particular type of like being or creature, is it possible that when they were originally, whatever the origin was of these things, but they were just out in the open, they were taking people out, they were just attacking things, you know, they weren't trying to hide. So like they were out in the light, they were doing whatever. So people viewed them in that way. But once people became aware of these things, they had to be a little bit more stealthy with their attacks. They had to hide in the shadows. They had to hide in the dark. So over centuries of this transition happening, them reproducing in the shadows, all of this stuff, is it possible that the reason that the complexion could have changed not only in the Hollywood folklore, but in the actual literal folklore, getting into Strigoi and all that type of stuff, could it be a matter of they changed as they started becoming more something that hid in the shadows to avoid a human confrontation? Because, of course, with a lot of these apex predators or apex predators in general, the best way to attack something is by ambushing it. It's not coming at it dead on. It's hiding in the shadows, coming at it when it can't see you. So if you're going to view this thing as thinking like a typical apex predator, that's the way to do it. You hide in the shadows. You don't just blunt charge something.
Well, and again, that has a lot of possible Nephilim connections as well. You know, in Nephilim folklore, you know, they were these big, powerful beings that were cannibals and fed off human beings. And throughout the years, as kind of the bloodlines weakened and their numbers decreased, humans started hunting these things down. So, you know, that's basically two ways of saying the same thing.
Yep, exactly. And just to throw it in, too, I recently had Justin Doc Brown from Prometheus Lens on Inquiries, and he was breaking down the whole thing of, like, Esau and everything. But if anybody wants to go and listen to that, either go listen to his show or you guys can listen to Inquiries. I won't go through that whole thing. But the root of it at the end was basically he was talking about how there was these other, like, Nephilim tribes that existed, and these different Nephilim tribes did different things. Like, one of them, they were known for bringing things back from the dead. They were known to be blood drinkers. I think their particular name would have, like, translated to, like, bloodsucker or something like that. So even in the Bible as a connection, if you start kind of following this storyline that seems like it's purposely kind of split up, it almost kind of seems like these vampiric entities are even mentioned even within the Bible. And view that how you want to view it, whether it's an ancient document or, you know, some type of thing that's connected, whatever way you guys want to happen to view it. I mean, there's just yet another reference to a tribe of vampires, and that possibly spreading down from there, and people basically taking these things out as a group and then them hiding in the shadows. Like, this is a common motif that it doesn't matter what religion, what folklore, whatever you view it through, it all kind of has the same end result. These things become prominent, they start taking out a bunch of people start teaming up, they go after these things, they start hiding out in the shadows, and they start using guerrilla warfare.
Yeah. We're all talking about the same thing here. It's just issues of language. But one more thing, I don't want to derail your episode too far here at the end, but I do have a quote I want to share with you and the listeners, if that's okay. I found this out of a book by Nick Redfern, which a lot of our listeners and viewers are probably familiar with. He's on like Ancient Aliens and all those type of shows. It's called The Real Men in Black. And when you told me you were going to do this episode, I knew I had to get this book out and find this section so I could read this. So in the book, Redfern's talking about these connections between Men in Black and vampires. And there's a quote here from long ago guest on the show, Dr. Alan Greenfield.
One of the craziest people we've ever had on the show.
Yes.
With the initial best line of, "Oh, I get it. You're the conductor. Choo-choo." Choo-choo.
But anyway, so that's an old episode. You guys should go check it out. If any of y'all have watched the Hellier documentaries, you've seen Greenfield on there. Super interesting guy. But anyway, in this book, there is a quote about Greenfield talking about this connection between Men in Black and vampires. So if you'll let me just kind of indulge for a second and read this quote. Greenfield says, quote, "The thing about the cases that Keel, Barker, and a number of others were most interested in is that these Men in Black don't seem to be human beings at all. They seem like they have to make an effort to appear human. It's like they're trying to project their existence from moment to moment and having a lot of trouble doing it." He continues, "In some cases, people feel that the Men in Black have sucked energy out of the air. So you have vampire comparisons, psi vampires. Whatever they are, they seem to draw their energy from the environment around them." Greenfield also says, "Maybe the Men in Black are generated by fear. I have a hunch that fear may be a major factor in generating a good deal of the phenomenon of UFOs in general. Although there seems to be some separate intelligence that is involved too. I don't think it's all generated pure and simple by the witness. But what happens is the witness experiences a kind of fear. Barker thought it was a combination of eroticism and fear, which we kind of talked about a few minutes ago. And he danced around that issue because of the times he lived in and because of certain paths of his personal life that he kept private at the time. And here's the part that I thought was really good. It seems to me there is a kind of sexual panic that is the ingredient that produces or predicts the manifestation of the coming of the fear-inducing beings. And that would range from the Men in Black and their threats to the alien abduction phenomenon and their physical examination angle, which contains all sort of sexual overtones. So here we go again. The phenomenon growing, changing, wearing masks. It all has this sexual reproduction aspect to it. And in centuries past, they presented themselves as vampires. Maybe now they're presenting themselves as aliens. So sorry to go kind of long-winded there at the end, but I had a lot of thoughts to share.
All right, guys, this is our last break, so hold on tight.
And now back to the show.
Well, I wanted to throw this in too, and I'm glad that you brought that up because it kind of comes around full circle with what I was about to bring up. If you take out the human aspect of this, it seems like there's a lot more validity to it. And the way that I mean that is if you take out the fact that werewolves turn, or the humans turn into werewolves, and you just have the creature itself, you have Dogman. There's a lot more validity to that.
Exactly.
You have the whole concept of the Greys. They're not, us. They're kind of like they're mixing with our DNA, and then they're creating this other subvariation. Same with the Nephilim. You have this whole thing that there's something other than us, and then they reproduce with us, and then you have this subvariation. Same thing with these. If you take out the human aspect that these things were originally human, then it seems like it might have more validity to it. If you're dealing with another creature, another being altogether, then it seems a lot less crazy because somebody isn't turning into this thing. Yeah. And the other point that I want to point out is with the Strigoi and the Moroi were the offspring of the Strigoi after they had reproduced with humans. So even within some of the folklore, it specifically kind of states that the originator isn't human. So for me, at least, like I said, that adds more validity to it because the whole idea about a person transforming into a monster in a literal sense seems a little bit more out there to me than a monster creature existing and then reproducing with people in some sense. And then it's starting to need the human factors after that. Because even the Sasquatch stuff, you look at the DNA for Sasquatch, what do you get? Female human, unknown male DNA. So a lot of these creatures, like clearly we're dealing with something that isn't rooted in humans. And I feel like with a lot of the vampire folklore, everybody roots it as it's a human turned into this thing. And I don't think that that's the case. And the farther that I've dug into this, the more validity it's kind of brought to vampires for me that is the case, that we're dealing with a whole separate subspecies of things that is reproducing with us, which again gets full circle back into the Greys with the Nephilim. Like it's clearly just the same story that's getting repeated. So is there validity to that story? Is it just a common trope? But for me, at least, considering that these things popped out in different points all around the world, all around the same time, and people have connections with each other, my assumption would be that we're dealing with something other than us that reproduces with us.
Wholeheartedly. I'm not going to belabor my points too much more. I've taken up too much time here at the end. But yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. I think that the nugget of truth is there. I think that whatever these legends were based off of is a very real thing. And I think it could be, like we always say, one person's angel or demon is another person's extraterrestrial. One person's vampire is another person's Nephilim or Men in Black. And I think, like we always say, we're all talking about the same thing here. And I think it's another case of the phenomenon growing and changing and wearing masks.
So let me throw this in here too before we completely wrap up, because I asked you in the very, very beginning what your initial thought was on vampires. At least after what we talked about today, what's kind of your thought? Like, do you put validity into it? Like, what's your closing thought after just at least hearing the information from today?
So
did it bring more validity to you, or did it kind of take more away? That's kind of what I'm hitting at.
Yeah. So in the past, just from like this kind of this Red Fern book and talking about the connections between vampires and other things that we put a lot of stock in on this show, I already thought there was like some nugget of truth there, and it was based off of some real world thing. And after going through all these historical depictions from around the world and seeing all these other connections to all sorts of things we talk about on the show, mostly Nephilim, I'm more convinced of the validity of what inspired the vampire myths being a real thing than I ever was before. So I really appreciate you putting this one together. This was a super fun one to kind of dig into a lot of the connections. And I hope I didn't go too off the rails there at the end. But like I said, once you told me what you were talking about, I knew I was going to have a lot of thoughts.
No, I was hoping you would at the end, because my whole thing is I wanted to try to lay down the groundwork, and you've kind of connected it more in with the modern day stuff. So I'm glad that you threw all that stuff into the end. I figured with this one, the reason I didn't get into like energy vampires, Men in Black, and Black Eyed Kids was because I figured that you were probably going to fill in the gaps enough. So I'm glad that you did on that one at least.
No, I think we worked out being a good team on this one. But do you have anything else you want to end with? Kind of any take-home points for the listeners?
Well, all I can say is that this was intended to be a Halloween episode, so I hope that you guys enjoyed it as a Halloween episode. And hopefully we'll bring something else Halloweenish, maybe, because we had something that kind of shifted around with our guests next week. But all those feels, hopefully we did something a little bit different from typical vampire stuff for you guys. Hopefully we've connected it into some real world stuff for you guys. And hopefully we can bring more validity to at least the archetype of vampires, to hopefully kind of pull it away from folklore and maybe make you guys realize that maybe we are actually dealing with something that might be out there.
Well said. And if anyone would like to get in touch with us for any reason whatsoever, or to be a guest on the show, Shane, tell them how they can do that.
First and foremost, you guys can email us at bizarreencounters@outlook.com, or you guys can get a hold of us through social media. Instagram and Facebook are the ones that we're the most active on. And you guys could probably also shoot us a message on TikTok. I know that one's becoming a pretty active social media site, and we've been using that regularly for clips for the show, so hit us up there too. You guys can also get a hold of us through the submission form, which is available up at the top of the link tree. And the last way you guys get a hold of us is through our hotline number. You guys can call or text that 24/7, and that number is 313-364-1551. And
you guys be sure to show some love to our friends and sponsors of the show. We've got our buddies Rick and Hans with I Know Squatch for all your squatchy gear needs. We've got our buddy Dave, aka the Snarly Yow, with Snarly Yow Natural Products. And we got our buddy Joe with Crypto Theology for all your wowable Halloween cryptids.
When you're at
Vampire got mad at you.
Okay.
And don't forget to check out our other awesome friends with affiliate links, Dimension Devices and Sticker Mule, with some additional discounts and credits available for you guys, with more information on that available down in the show notes.
And as always, everything we've mentioned is in the link tree in the show description.
And just like I remind you guys every single episode, but particularly in the month of October, I definitely feel like I need to remind you guys to always, always stay bizarre. Bizarre. Bizarre.
Vampires is Nephilims?
I became a vampire to suck blood and to fuck forever.